Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Southern horrors and other writings. Yeah, we'll be getting in a little further here because we looked at the history of lynching and everything, but now we're getting a little further into some of the more in depth stuff, so it may be a little tough to listen to. But anyway, let's jump into this. Wells and the American Agenda. Ida B. Wells came of age during Radical Reconstruction. She was born a slave in Holly Springs, Mississippi on July the 16th, 1862. The eldest daughter of James Wells, a carpenter, and Elizabeth Warrenton Wells, a cook. After the Civil War, Wells's parents were politically active in Holly Springs. Her father became locally known as a raceman, a term assigned to African American men and women who were intimately involved in the leadership of African American communities, the securing of civil rights, and the betterment of political, economic, and social conditions. James Wells was a local businessman, a Mason, and a member of the Board of Trustees of Shaw University, supported by the Freedmen's Bureau, which later became Rust College. Both the Wellses' parents provided Wells with strong role models. They worked hard and held places of respect in the community as forward-looking people. They educated their children in Freedmen's Bureau schools and were committed to helping to forge a brighter world around them. Despite the considerable odds against African Americans in making the transition from slavery to freedom, the Wells family shared with others a sense of great expectations for the future in freedom. Released from the legal restrictions of slavery, James and Elizabeth Wells and their children expected justice under the law for all. In her autobiography, Wells discusses the spirit of activism and achievement that enriched her family's lives during the early years. My earliest recollections are of reading the newspaper to my father and an admiring group of his friends. He was interested in politics, and I heard the words Ku Klux Klan long before I knew what they meant. I knew dimly that it meant something fearful by the anxious way my mother walked the floor at night when my father was out to a political meeting. Our job was to go to school and learn all we could. My mother went along to school with us until she learned to read the Bible. After that, she visited the school regularly to see how we were getting along. She was not 40 when she died, but she had borne 8 children and brought us up with a strict discipline that many mothers who have had educational disadvantages have not exceeded. By such attitude and actions, James and Elizabeth Wells instilled in their daughter a keen sense of duty to God, family, and community. When Wells was 16, her parents and her youngest brother died suddenly in a yellow fever epidemic. In keeping with the deeply felt sense of obligation inherited from her parents, Wells assumed responsibility for herself and for her remaining 5 siblings. Another brother had died some years earlier of spinal meningitis. Her childhood ended abruptly, and life of independence and service to others began. Wells left school, made herself look older, passed the teaching examination in her county, and obtained a teaching position 6 miles outside of town. During the week, Wells fulfilled her teaching responsibilities while an old friend of her mother's took care of the children. On the weekends, Wells came home to become head of the family and take on the full burden of household chores before returning to her country school on Sunday evening. After a year of this grueling schedule, Wells's aunt, her mother's sister, invited her to move to Memphis, Tennessee to better her circumstances. Recognizing opportunity, Wells agreed to relocate. She arranged for her 2 brothers to be apprenticed with local tradesmen and for a physically handicapped sister to be taken care of by relatives in Holly Springs. She took her 2 youngest sisters with her to Memphis. Wells also carried with her habits and preferences that could constitute a foundation for her new life. She had acquired a strong sense of self, confident in her ability to work hard and to provide for her own needs and for those of her family. In having assumed adult responsibilities so successfully, she had an uncommon sense of independence as a young professional woman. Given the background of activism in which she had been nurtured, Wells had internalized a sense of social responsibility and a desire to participate actively in community development. When Wells reached Memphis, she was eventually able to secure a position in the Shelby County school system and began studying for an examination that would make her eligible for employment in the Memphis City schools. As in Holly Springs, the African American community of Memphis took pride in being forward-looking and culturally and intellectually vibrant. They worked aggressively to take advantage of opportunities and to operate as productive and responsible citizens. Wells's years in the richly endowed African American community of Memphis were excellent training for the public life that she seemed destined to lead. Wells continued to be active in her own church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, as well as in others. She came into contact with AME bishops such as Henry McNeil Turner, who she had met and heard nationally renowned, politically astute. Who were learned men, excellent orators, and politically active. By 1891, she had met and heard nationally renowned, politically astute figures including Frederick Douglass, Blanche K. Bruce, and Frances Ellen Hopkins Harper, one of the most highly respected creative writers, public speakers, and community activists of her day. Wells, who came to know and respect local African American leaders such as Robert Church, one of the first African American Americans in the Memphis area to acquire wealth and property. Wells joined a lyceum composed primarily of public school teachers whose members enjoyed music, read together, gave recitations, wrote and presented essays, and debated issues of the day. Associated with the Lyceum was a periodical, the Evening Star. By 1886, Wells had been asked to assume its editorship. With her success as editor, and because of a lawsuit that she filed against the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern Railroad Company, she was asked to write a regular column in the form of letters to the readers for the Living Way, a religious weekly paper. She signed the letters Lola and wrote about conditions and problems that were of critical concern to her people. As she stated in her autobiography, I had an instinctive feeling that the people who had little or no school training should have something coming into their homes weekly which dealt with their problems in a simple, helpful way. So, in weekly letters to the Living Way, I wrote in a plain, common sense way on things which concerned our people, knowing that their education was limited. I never used a word of 2 syllables where one would serve the purpose. Success with her Lola column led to Wells's syndication across the country in the African American periodical press. During this period, Wells became a leading community activist through a sequence of pivotal events. First, in 1884, on a trip from Memphis back to her Shelby County school, Wells was forcibly removed from a train for taking a seat in the ladies' coach rather than the smoking car, a privilege to which the conductor asserted verbally and physically that she had no right. Wells was not inclined to accept this treatment, believing it to be an infringement on her rights and an insult to her person. She sued the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern Railroad Company and won. The railroad company appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court and the decision was overturned. This ruling was one among many incidents during this period that confirmed the regaining of political and social control by the whole Southern power elite and the mending of the North-South rift in the interest of participating in a global economy. The Wells case became a minor pawn within a display of resurgent power. The retrenchments of the post-Reconstruction era were a blow for Wells. She was incensed when Jim Crow laws were instituted. They dictated, for example, that African Americans could not ride in the first-class car on the train even with the purchase of a first-class ticket. When she witnessed the inequities of the educational system with the removal of the advocacy of the Freedmen's Bureau, controlled by Northerners, and the establishment of public schools controlled by white Southerners, she was appalled. And she was infuriated when she saw that African American citizens had little or no rights, or little or no protection against violence. Wells recognized that such encroachments on the rights of American citizens were unlawful. She was inspired to speak out, and speak she did. After the disappointment with her lawsuit, Wells was asked to write about her article for The Living Way about her ordeal. With the success of this first editorial in 1884, she was invited to write the Lola column for The Living Way, and by 1889 she had become co-owner of a newspaper, the Free Speech and Headlight, with Reverend F. Nightingale and J. L. Fleming. During 1889, Wells represented the paper at the convention on the National Press Association, where she was elected secretary of that organization. By 1891, she and Fleming had brought out Nightingale's interest in the paper and shortened its name to the Free Speech, and she also secured the income competitive with her teaching salary, which was an important achievement since last editorials against the school board led to her being fired from her teaching post. Wells had firmly established herself as a bold woman who spoke the truth and as a respected journalist of considerable renown. Within the decades since her parents' death, she had become a businesswoman, an active journalist in her own community, a syndicated columnist in African American periodicals throughout the country, and an office holder in her professional organization during a time when very few women, and even fewer African American women, would make any such claims. By March the 9th, 1892, when her three friends were murdered, Wells had a reputation as a sharp-tongued political observer. With these lynchings, however, she was touched much more deeply than she had ever expected to be by such events, for these had occurred in Memphis, a civilized city, and the victims were people that she knew very well. She began asking herself basic questions. How can this be? What's really going on here? And collecting data on lynchings more systematically. Her findings were eye-opening, and she was energized to launch an anti-lynching campaign in order to counter misconceptions and to encourage the application of justice. When Wells published her May 21st editorial, she did so hurriedly. She was on her way to Philadelphia for the annual meeting of the American Methodist Episcopal Church. After the conference, Wells was to visit New York as the guest of T. Thomas Fortune, editor of the New York Age, a paper in which her Lola column was syndicated. When Wells reached New York, she learned from Fortune that the offices of her paper had been ransacked and the equipment destroyed, that her partner J. L. Fleming had barely escaped Memphis with his life, and that some white men in Memphis had promised to torture and kill her on sight if she ever set foot in Tennessee again. In effect, Wells was forced into exile. She would not go south again for another 30 years. Wells became a reporter for the New York Age, where she told her story of exile in the feature article on June the 25th, 1892. As she stated in her autobiography, having lost my paper, had a price put on my life, and been made an exile from my home for hinting at the truth, I felt that I owed it to myself and to my race to tell the whole truth now that I was where I could do so freely. Wells's anti-lynching campaign gained momentum. Having become a victim of terrorism herself, Wells was transformed from a regional figure with readers in several cities to a national figure and ultimately to an international one. Her public status, however, was atypical of women's experience during this era. In the 1890s, women who discussed social and political issues rather than concerns of the home in public arenas were pioneers in territory that was fundamentally gender restricted. That is, for males only. Wells, operating in an African American woman in such gender-defined space, and writing about issues that were both race and gender sensitive, was remarkable indeed. So yeah, we'll go ahead and end that piece there. Let's go back and look at some of the notations at the bottom of these pages. Come on. Oh, goodness. Okay. $17, where is that referencing? Hard looking for these notations when okay, there it is. Wells' years in the richly endowed African American community of Memphis were excellent training for the public life that she seemed destined to lead. And it says, for more information on the Memphis years, see Miriam DaCosta Willis, Ida B. Wells, The Memphis Diaries. Okay, we got a lot going on here. 18, 19, 20. Wells also came to know and respect local African American leaders such as Robert Church, one of the first African Americans in Memphis area to acquire wealth and property. Robert Church was also the father of Mary Church Terrell, first president of the National Association of Colored Women, the national organization for a nationwide network of black women's clubs that engaged actively in community development work. Terrell also became a rival for Wells in many of Wells's attempts as a national leader in the black club women's movement. Terrell usually won in these contests. So, yeah, even though she looked up to people like Robert Church, Church's own daughter would be just as big in many of these situations. 19. She signed the letters Lola and wrote about conditions and problems that were of critical concern to her people, as she stated in her autobiography. It may be Eola instead of Lola, because it kind of looks like that first letter may be an I instead of an L. So, The name Eola may actually have resulted from misreading the letters as they appeared in print. Ida may have been perceived as Eola. Okay, and it stuck. So yeah, because the circle and line on the D somehow became separated. Instead of being Ida, she became Eola. Let's see. The Wells case became a minor pawn within a display of resurgent power. For more information on the intersection of post-Reconstruction and imperialistic agenda, see John Hope Franklin and Alfred A. Moss Jr.'s From Slavery to Freedom, A History of Negro Americans. I believe I actually have that particular textbook. I don't know if it's the same particular volume of it or edition of it, but yeah, I think I do have that particular textbook, though. Interesting. But yeah. Give me a second. I'll be right back to see if I have that particular textbook. Okay, just a quick notation to put in the middle of this video here. I will have said I can't find it because I gave up searching and ended the video, but just to kind of let you all know before we get to that point, this is the 9th edition of the book. The one they were talking about is the 6th edition, but yeah. From Slavery to Freedom, A History of African Americans. I knew I had the book somewhere, but yeah. Good book. John Hope Franklin, I don't think's with us any longer, but yeah. Yeah, died 2009, but 9th edition of the book I took for African American history class, Dr. Carter, I think. Yeah. Anyway, just if I can hold it up here. I did find it. Let you know, yeah. But let's get back to the video. I thought I fucking had it. I remember reading it one day. But apparently I don't know where the fuck it is now. Anyway. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite your sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.